They mocked me for being poor. At 18, my father revealed everything. Hi, my name is Ethan, and in high school, I was a loser. At least, that's what everyone called me. Not because I talked too much, not because I caused problems, but because I was poor, and everyone could see it. My father was a contractor, a simple one. He didn't own a company, didn't wear suits, didn't talk about projects or clients the way other dads did. He worked with his hands. Early mornings, late nights, always tired. He didn't make much money, and because of that, life was tight. Every dollar mattered. I remember thinking, even as a kid, that our life felt like it was always on pause, not falling apart, not getting better, just waiting, waiting for the next paycheck, waiting for things to calm down, waiting for later. There were weeks when work slowed down. Jobs got delayed. Clients disappeared. Sometimes my father came home quiet. That was how I knew things were bad. He never said it directly. He just stopped turning on the TV, stopped buying anything that wasn't necessary. Once, I overheard him on the phone, arguing with someone who hadn't paid him. His voice was low, controlled, but his hands were shaking. I remember one night in particular. We hadn't eaten much that day. My father said he wasn't hungry, which I learned meant there isn't enough for both of us. Later that evening, we walked into a small fast food place near the highway. Not to order, to ask. I stayed behind him, staring at the floor, while he explained the situation, that a client hadn't paid, that he'd work it out, that we just needed something small. The girl at the counter looked uncomfortable. She called her manager. People behind us pretended not to listen. Someone sighed loudly. We left with 2 small burgers. I didn't say thank you. I was afraid my voice would break. At school, everything felt louder. The clothes I wore came from a local assistance center. They were clean, but they were old. Faded colors, soft in the wrong places, and they smelled like storage. No matter how many times we washed them, that smell never fully went away. Other kids noticed. They always do. I didn't have a smartphone, while everyone else compared apps and cameras. I kept a cracked flip phone in my pocket. If someone asked why, I never used it. I joked about not liking technology. That was easier than the truth. I learned early how to make myself small, how to avoid attention, how to blend into the background. I stopped raising my hand, stopped talking about weekends, because weekends were just home. My father never complained. That part mattered to me. He never blamed anyone, never talked about being unlucky. Whenever I asked if things would get easier, he'd say the same thing every time. We'll be okay. We always are. I wanted to believe him. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear him washing his hands in the sink, scrubbing longer than necessary, like he was trying to remove more than dirt. I used to think it was exhaustion, that he was just worn down by life. Back then, everything made sense. We struggled because we didn't have money. We didn't have money because my father worked hard jobs. That didn't pay much. It was simple, logical. That's what I told myself. What I didn't know was that this version of our life was only part of the story. And when I turned 18, my father would say something so casually, so quietly, that it would force me to rethink every single memory I just told you. High school doesn't ask who you are. It decides for you. And once that decision is made, everything you do gets filtered through it. By sophomore year, everyone already knew my role. I wasn't a loud kid, wasn't a funny one. I was the one people talked around, the one teachers looked at with concern, the one classmates used as contrast. At least we're not him. It wasn't constant bullying. That would have been easier. It was the small things. Being the last one picked. Every time. Group projects where nobody wanted me. Until the teacher forced them. Birthday parties I only found out about, because everyone else was talking about them on Monday. There was a guy named Ryan. Every school has one. Confident. Popular. Always surrounded. He never insulted me directly. That's how I knew he was good at it. He'd say things like, "Man, I respect you. I couldn't live like that." Like it was a compliment. Once, during lunch, someone asked why I always ate the same thing. Cheap sandwich. Apple. Water. Ryan laughed and said, "Consistency is important when you're broke." The table laughed. Not hard. Not cruel. Just enough. I smiled, because not smiling made it worse. I stopped asking my father for anything extra. Not because he told me no, but because I didn't want to see that pause in his eyes. That moment where he calculated. I learned to ask only for things I knew wouldn't hurt. There was a school trip junior year. 3 days. Another state. Everyone talked about it for weeks. I told my teacher I couldn't go, before she even asked for permission slips. She nodded like she expected it. That hurt more than if she had been surprised. At home, life stayed quiet. No jitting, no drama, just routines, dinner, homework, sleep. Sometimes my father came home with fresh bruises. Sometimes his hands shook slightly when he held his fork. I thought it was age. I thought it was stress. I thought it was normal. Once, I asked him why he didn't look for better work. Something safer. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Some jobs pay in ways you can't see right away." I didn't understand that then. Senior year was the worst. Not because things got louder, because they didn't. By then, I was already labeled. Teachers talked about my potential. Counselors talked about realistic options. Nobody asked what I wanted. They told me what made sense. There was one moment I never talk about. During a presentation, someone whispered something about my clothes. I lost my place. The room went quiet. The teacher waited. I felt my face burn. And for the first time, I wanted to disappear completely. Not run. Not fight. Just stop existing for a second. That night, I told my father I didn't want to go back to school. I expected him to argue. He didn't. He just listened. Then he said something that confused me. "You won't always be seen the way you are right now." I asked him how he knew. He didn't answer. Graduation came. People hugged. People cried. Parents took photos. My father stood in the back, hands in his pockets, watching. Not proud, not sad, just observant. A few weeks later, on my 18th birthday, he asked me to sit down at the kitchen table. No cake, no celebración, just 2 glasses of water, and silence. He looked at me, the same way he had that night. I asked to quit school, and that's when he said, "There's something about our life you don't understand yet." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one we'd eaten in my entire life. Scratched surface, one chair that always wobbled. Nothing about the room felt important, which is why what he said next hit harder than it should have. He didn't start with an apology, didn't clear his throat, didn't say my name. He just looked at me and said, "I need you to understand something about me." That was new. My father never talked about himself. He asked me a question, a simple one. "Do you think I worked hard?" I answered immediately, "Yes." Too quickly, because that was the one thing I was always sure of. He nodded, then asked another question. "Do you think I did my best?" That one took longer, but I still said yes. He leaned back in his chair, not tired, not emotional, measured, and said, "Then you need to understand that none of this was an accident." I didn't respond. I waited for him to explain. He didn't. He asked me if I remembered certain things. The nights he came home late. The jobs that fell through. The times we had to wait. I said yes. Of course I did. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. I wasn't unlucky. That was it. No follow-up. Just that sentence. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it didn't fit. Because it didn't belong anywhere in my memory. He told me he had choices. Not dramatic ones. Not sudden miracles. Just options. Jobs he didn't take. Paths he didn't follow. Offers he turned down quietly. He said it the way someone explains traffic. Calm. Neutral. I asked him why. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked me something back. "Do you know how people treat you when they think you have nothing?" I told him yes. He nodded. "Good," he said. "Then you've learned something. Most people don't." That's when I started to feel angry. Not yelling anger. The kind that sits in your stomach. It makes everything feel heavier. I asked him if he knew what school was like for me. He didn't interrupt. He let me talk. Really talk. For the first time. When I finished, he didn't apologize. He didn't justify himself. He just said, "I was watching." That sentence hurt. More than if he had denied it. I asked him if he could have made things easier. He looked at me and said, "Yes. No hositación." Then he said something that I didn't understand until much later. If I had stepped in too early, you would have mistaken relief for strength. I told him that sounded cruel. He didn't disagree. He stood up, walked to the sink, and washed his hands. Slowly, like he always did. Then he turned back to me and said, "One day, you'll see people for who they really are, not who they pretend to be." That was the night I realized. My father wasn't weak, but I still didn't know what that actually meant. I went to bed angry, confused, with a question I couldn't shake. If he wasn't unlucky, then what was he? After that conversation, nothing changed, and that's what scared me the most. My father didn't suddenly act different. Didn't explain more. Didn't sit me down again. The house stayed the same. The routines stayed the same. But I didn't. I started noticing things. Not new things. Old things I had ignored my entire life. Like how my father never panicked. Not once. No matter how bad things got. He was never frantic. Bills late. Jobs falling through. Empty fridge. He was calm. Too calm. At the time, I thought it was resignation. Now it felt like control. I remembered how he never complained about clients. He'd say things like, "They'll figure it out." Not "I hope." Not "maybe." Just certainty. I remembered how he never asked for help. Never borrowed money. Never leaned on anyone. Even when we asked for food that night. He hadn't begged. He had explained. Like it was temporary. Like it wasn't personal. I started noticing how people spoke to him. Not friends. Strangers. Suppliers. Older men at job sites. People who looked like they'd seen more of the world. They didn't talk down to him. They listened. Once at a hardware store, the clerk called him by his last name. Not sir. Not man. His name. Like they'd met before. My father corrected him quietly and moved on. I didn't ask about it. I wish I had. He kept files in a drawer in his bedroom. I'd seen them my whole life. Manila folders. Neatly labeled. I always assumed they were bills. After that talk, I realized I had never actually seen him stressed while looking at them. There were other things too. Small, strange absences. Days when he left early and came back clean. No dust. No cuts. He'd say work was short. I believed him. I started thinking about the bruises. They were real. I'm sure of that. But they never slowed him down. Never forced him to rest. Almost like they were optional. I hated myself for thinking this way. It felt disloyal. Like I was trying to rewrite my childhood. To make sense of one conversation. So I stopped asking questions. A few weeks later, I left for university. Nothing special. A public school. Basic dorm. No celebración. Just my father driving me there in silence. Before he left, he handed me an envelope. Not thick. Not dramatic. Just my name written on it. Inside was enough money to cover some expenses. Not much. I looked at him confused. He said, "You'll learn more by having to choose." Then he left. University was supposed to be different. A reset. New people. New reputation. And for a while, it was. No one knew me. No one cared. I could speak without being labeled. I could exist. And that's when I realized something painful. I wasn't broken. I had just been surrounded by people who needed me to stay small. But the past didn't stay behind. It never does. One night, during my first year, I saw someone I recognized. Ryan. Same laugh. Same confidence. Different place. Same energy. He didn't recognize me. Not at first. And that was the moment I understood something else. Revenge doesn't start with anger. It starts with choice. Ryan didn't recognize me. Not at first. He walked past me in the student center, laughing with the same confidence. The same careless ease he had in high school. Different place. Same energy. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear. Not anger. Control. I could have said his name. I could have watched his face change. But I didn't. I wanted to see who he was. When he didn't know who I used to be. University was the first place. Where no one had decided who I was in advance. No history. No rumors. No labels. I spoke more. I listened better. I noticed how people responded. When they weren't looking for weakness. I learned something important that year. People don't respect confidence. They respect certainty. And certainty doesn't come from money. It comes from knowing. You can walk away. I worked small jobs on campus. Nothing impressive. But I never looked desperate. I never complained. I never explained myself. That alone changed how people treated me. Ryan and his friends were everywhere. They moved through campus. Like they owned the place. Parties. Connections. Loud conversations about plans and futures. I stayed on the edges. Watching. Learning. One night, I ended up at the same party as him. Music too loud. Lights too bright. Someone asked me what I studied. Before I could answer, Ryan jumped in. "Probably something safe," he said, laughing. Some people like stability. It was the same tone, the same smile. But something was different. People didn't laugh right away. They looked at me, waiting. I smiled and said, "I like options." That was it. Nothing clever. Nothing aggressive. But I saw it. That moment where his certainty slipped. Just a little. After that, things shifted. Not dramatically. Subtly, people started asking me questions. Not about money, about opinions, about decisions, about plans. A few months later, I got an internship through a connection Ryan didn't even know existed. Nothing flashy, but it mattered. I didn't post about it, didn't talk about it. I just showed up, prepared. That's when I realized something else. Revenge doesn't need an audience. It needs time. During winter break, I went home. Same house, same table. My father looked at me differently. Not proud, not surprised, like he had been waiting. He asked one question. Do they treat you differently now? I asked him how he knew. He said, because you're standing differently. That night, he finally opened one of the folders. Not all of it, just enough. He didn't show me numbers. He showed me patterns. Ownership, leverage, silence. He said, money isn't loud. People are. When I went back to campus, Ryan recognized me, really recognized me, not as a memory, as a presence. One day, he asked what I drove. I said, I don't. That confused him. Good. The real revenge wasn't coming. It had already started, because I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was choosing rooms. When I came home that spring, the house felt smaller. Not because it changed, because I had. My father noticed it immediately. The way I moved, the way I spoke, the way I didn't explain myself anymore. He didn't ask how school was. He asked something else. Do you still feel like you owe people explanations? I thought about it, then said no. He nodded. That night, he asked me to sit with him again. Same table, same chairs, different energy. He didn't talk about the past. He talked about patterns. How people decide who matters before they ever hear them speak. How power doesn't announce itself. How the loudest person in the room is almost never the one in control. I asked him why he never stepped in. Why he let things go so far. Why he let me believe we were always one mistake away from collapse. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, because comfort creates noise, and noise hides weakness. I told him that sounded calculated. He didn't deny it. That was the first time he used the word choice. Not luck, not circumstance. Choice. He told me he could have changed our life. At any point. Not overnight, but steadily, safely, quietly. And that was the problem. If you had grown up comfortable, he said, you would have learned to expect it. I asked him if he ever felt guilty. He paused, then said, every day. That surprised me. He stood up, went to his room, and came back with a different folder. Thicker, older. This one wasn't labeled. He didn't open it. He placed it on the table and said, everything you think you survived was preparation. I felt something shift inside me. Not relief. Responsibility. Before I left for campus again, he said one last thing. When a moment comes, don't prove anything. Decide. I didn't understand what he meant. Not fully. Back at university, things escalated. Ryan wasn't mocking anymore. He was watching. People started asking me questions. About internships. About plans. About connections. I never overshared. I never corrected assumptions. Silence did the work. Then came the invitation. An alumni networking event. Private. Selective. The kind Ryan always talked about, but never actually attended. I almost said no. Then I remembered my father's words. Decide. That night, I didn't take the bus. I didn't walk. I arrived differently. I didn't come back to campus to flex. I came back to finish something. Ryan still acted the same way. Confident. Untouchable. Like the world was a place made for people like him. He had plans. Big ones. A startup idea he talked about nonstop. A pitch he rehearsed at every party. A future he assumed was guaranteed. Everyone listened to him, just like in high school. What he didn't know was that my father had been listening too. Not to him, to the numbers. A few weeks after the alumni event, the university announced a student investment showcase. Selected projects, private funding, serious money. Ryan was in, front and center. He bragged about it openly. He didn't know who else was attending. That night, I didn't arrive late. I arrived on time. The Ferrari this time wasn't parked outside. It was waiting at the entrance. Bullied. People noticed. Ryan was already presenting. When I walked in, slides, big promises, confident voice. I sat down quietly. Front row. He didn't recognize me at first. Then his eyes locked on mine. And for half a second, he hesitated. Just enough. After the presentations, investors moved around the room, asking questions. taking notes. Ryan saw me talking to someone important, someone he desperately wanted access to. He approached us, smiling. Didn't know you were into this kind of thing, he said, trying to sound casual. I smiled back. I'm not, I said. I'm into outcomes. The man next to me asked how I knew Ryan. Ryan jumped in. High school, he said. We go way back. I looked at him and said calmly, yeah, you made sure of that. There was a pause. Not awkward. Dangerous. Later that night, the shortlist was announced. Ryan's project didn't make it. No explanation. Just not selected. He was furious. Confused. He didn't understand. 2 days later, his internship offer was reconsidered. A week after that, his funding connections went quiet. Emails unanswered. Calls unreturned. He finally confronted me. Cornered me near the library. Angry. Desperate. He asked me what I did. I told him the truth. Nothing. Because I didn't sabotage him. I didn't lie. I didn't attack. I just let people see him the way he used to see me. Without protection. I didn't take his future. I took his advantage. That's when I understood what my father had been teaching me all along. Revenge isn't about pain. It's about position. Ryan still walks campus. Still talks. Still smiles sometimes. But something is gone. The certainty. He knows now what it feels like to stand in a room and realize no one is on your side. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel proud. I felt complete. That night, I called my father. I told him everything. He listened, then said, now you understand. Power doesn't shout. It rearranges the room. I still don't talk about money. I don't talk about where I come from. Because the people who need to know already do. They didn't lose because I was rich. They lost because they thought I was nothing.